Well, hello friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Today's episode is a spotlight on an incredibly influential and important group to me and many others, and I'm going to tell you why. And that's the group is the Desert Rose Band, and we're going to talk about their history, their why they were influential, the members and all of the things that the members did before and after their time in the Desert Rose Band. And we're going to have some fun. Also, I'm going to put a link in the description to where I actually have information on they played their final show at the Country Music Hall of Fame in October of 2022. And I have like the set list and what instruments that John Jorgenson used on every tune. That John was nice enough to help me, proofread that also. So we're going to talk about the Desert Rose Band, and such an important group to me, and also one of the reasons that I became friends with Brad Paisley in college was that that was a group that we both were major fans of. That's something that we bonded over, was just our love of the group and John Jorgenson's guitar playing. And so they're a really important group to me, influenced, kind of changed some of the trajectory of my life. And so this episode is a tribute to them, who, again, they played their final concert at the Country Music Hall of Fame this last month, and it was a really special and also a little bit bittersweet, but joyful occasion for me and everyone that loves the band. So let's just start with the beginning. Let's talk about some of the members and some of their past accomplishments before they were even in the Desert Rose Band. So first off would be Chris Hillman. So Chris Hillman was the bassist for the Byrds, and so that's him, on all those mid '60s folk and country rock tunes that the Byrds did. I think the Wrecking Crew played on some of the earliest stuff, but 8 Miles High and all the big stuff that we all love, that was Chris Hillman playing bass. And of course he's kind of got his foot in as a songwriter on the tune Time Between that was on the Younger Than Yesterday, which of course also features Clarence White playing Telecaster pre-B-Bender on. And and then of course the band went through some changes. Original members left, and they brought in Graham Parsons. They did the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album, which of course that and kind of Graham's International Submarine Band are kind of seen as the beginning of country rock by many. And then not that long after that, Chris left the band, Graham left the band first, and they formed the Flying Burrito Brothers, which of course incredibly important and influential band for those of us that like California country rock music. And from there you have Bernie Leadon was another member of that group later on. And I guess you kind of have some of the roots of the Eagles and such in there. After Graham leaves the Burrito Brothers, Chris keeps soldiering on with it. And it's here also that I think that Chris doesn't get enough credit. I think Graham, since he died from a drug overdose, he's kind of glorified more his contributions. But so many of those great songs were co-written with Chris, and Chris was really kind of the guy that kept Graham going for a long time. And in fact, they split up. Graham left the Burrito Brothers because Chris was tired of corralling him and getting him to show up to gigs and to rehearsals and things like that. So Chris goes on to do a variety of things. There's some somewhat reunions with the Byrds, some supergroup things with like Gene Clark and Roger McGuinn, and solo albums. And by the early 1980s, he's kind of changed direction, and he's kind of gone more in an acoustic and more traditional country kind of angle. And so you get this album, Morning Sky. It's great record that, of course features Herb Pedersen and Bernie Leadon and Emery Gordy and, a lot of the California country dudes. Then you get this album, Desert Rose, which this is more of a, country, California country album that has some really nice contributions by James Burton and Bob Warford and Bernie Ledden. Plus it has, Al Perkins and Jerry Scheff and Herb Pedersen and all those cats on there. Then you get this kind of interesting, Christian album that was called Ever Call Ready. And it's, here you have, Bernie Ledden that's actually smiling. And then you have Chris and Al Perkins and, David Mansfield and Jerry Scheff. Jerry Scheff, of course, played bass with Elvis in the TCB band. So this is a fun album where they kind of do old bluegrass gospel kind of tunes. Well, during this time, Chris was mainly doing these kind of acoustic band things. And Bernie Ledden, who was playing with him, of course, the former Eagle, he decided to leave to join the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. And, because I think he kind of wanted to play some electric music. And so Bernie Ledden left, and then they were tasked with finding a new guitarist, maybe banjo player, who knows, multi-instrumentalist. So he had been told about this kid named John Jorgenson a number of times by Bill Bryson, who was playing bass with Chris Hillman. And Chris wasn't really willing to take a chance on him at that point. Finally, there was a kind of chance encounter that really shows the ballsiness of John Jorgenson, and also just how much luck is involved in this. So John had gone to the Anaheim NAMM show, and I think this was in 84 or 85, and he went to the Saga booth, and Saga had David Grisman, the mandolinist, who was kind of, dog music, kind of part of the newgrass movement thing. He had a signature model mandolin that Saga was making, and so he was in the booth demoing it. And John Jorgenson, knowing a lot of his tunes and also just being willing to put it out there, and just such a ballsy move, he asks if he can, play with him. So I think he, grabbed a guitar, grabbed a mandolin, and is here playing dog music with David Grisman. Well, up walks Chris Hillman, and there he sees this John Jorgenson character. And he decides that, he's a good player. And there he is playing with David Grisman. And he thought that it was something that had been organized, but it was really a kind of a chance thing where John just, got up and was jamming with him. So John Jorgenson becomes the new member of Chris Hillman's band, and is playing acoustic guitar and mandolin and such, and harmony vocals. And John starts hearing these tunes that Chris is writing and other tunes that they're performing, and he starts saying, I think these are really full band, like full country band material, and that we need to get a drummer and a steel guitar player. And Chris Hillman at that point, who of course had been part of bands, electric bands, for, probably close to 20 or 30 plus years, and was just kind of over it at that point, was saying, no, I don't hear it and I don't want to do it. John, who, was not about to take no for an answer when he really felt strongly about something, he made full-on demos of the tunes where John was singing, the lead and the harmony parts, and he was playing the different instruments, and, he made demos of the tunes and played them for Chris. And Chris, finally at that point, he kind of, got it. So also during this time earlier, Herb Pedersen had come in, and I need to talk a bit about Herb. So Herb is probably one of the greatest singers and harmony singers in that whole genre of kind of California country rock. So he's the duet voice on Emmylou Harris's If I Could Only Win Your Love. He's the harmony vocalist on so many Linda Ronstadt tracks. He toured with John Denver as a harmony vocalist when his band included the Wrecking Crew drummer Hal Blaine and James Burton playing guitar, and Emory Gordy Jr. on bass and Glenn D. Harden. I mean, when he had this all-star, $1 million band, Herb Pedersen was his one of his harmony vocalists and banjo and guitarist. So Herb, was also one of the Dillards. He had played bluegrass music with Chris Hillman and others, in the '60s. Just a one of the finest, harmony singers, and also, just a very fine banjo player and dobro player. One of the best. And then Bill Bryson was the bassist in this version of the band, and so that's kind of the nucleus, so you had Chris Hillman, you had Herb Pedersen, you had John Jorgenson, and you had Bill Bryson playing acoustic music together. Well, they decided they needed to add, and Bill Bryson had a history of playing, a lot of bluegrass music in California. So they decided they needed a steel player, and it was pretty quick that they got Dee Maness. And J.D. had been Tom Brumley's replacement in Buck Owens' Buckaroos in the late '60s, and he had, played on, all sorts of sessions and had been, really established, steel player. He also had played on the Graham Parsons International Submarine Band sessions and some of the Graham stuff. So that's, he kind of goes way back in the kind of California country thing. Then they needed a drummer, and so then John, he recommended someone that he had seen as a kid and had enjoyed, and that was Steve Duncan, who he had been in Rick Nelson's Stone Canyon band for many years, and is a fantastic drummer. And so that's when they finally got all 6 pieces together, and they started performing together. They got a deal with Curb and an agreement kind of with MCA, and you had the first Desert Rose Band album. And here she is. This is a fabulous album, and just the songs, the singing, the playing, the production on it. You have Paul Worley and Ed Say, and kind of a fun southwesterny photo on the cover with a very young looking Jorgenson and with his mandolin, and you got Herb with his Yamaha Clarence White looking guitar. I've always wanted to ask Herb about what this is, because it's got like a big sound hole, and I know that when he was working with John Denver, that Yamaha was doing a lot of custom things for them. So yeah, you have this no inlay, and he played this instrument a lot in the early days of the Desert Rose Band. And of course, Chris with his Sunburst J200. This album is amazing, and if you were only going to get one album besides their greatest hits album, this is the one to get. It really blew my mind. It was so different than anything else you were hearing on the radio. And again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but again, this album was released in 1987, and so in 1987 in Nashville, everything was Strats with EMG pickups and through TC chorus pedals plugged direct. And Reggie Young did a great job with that, and many others. And there's great things on those George Strait and Reba records and all sorts of other things that have that sound. But amps and Telecasters were kind of pushed to the wayside. And so in 1986, you had Pete Anderson's guitar work that you heard with Dwight Yoakam on Guitars Cadillacs, and that kind of is the first thing that kind of busted the door open a little bit for amp sounds and Telecasters. And then in '87, you had the Desert Rose Band, who really blew it wide open with not only amp sounds, but now it was Vox AC30s, which was not a sound that you really heard much in country music. If you did, it was at lower levels and it wasn't really cranked up, and you weren't really hearing kind of the clangy Vox sound. And it was a new sound. Also, John brought in all these different tones that weren't common. One was the electric 12 string, which he played a Rickenbacker, and which of course, it fit in perfectly with Chris Hillman, who of course had been, in the Byrds. So that was kind of part of the melding in of that, that earlier sound that Chris Hillman had. So you had the electric 12-string thing, you had the 6-string bass, which John used it in a melodic sense, not in a doubling the bass part, but he played many lines and intros. So you have even things like 1 step forward and 2 steps back that has the intro is a 6-string bass, or all sorts of tunes. He's Back and I'm Blue, and the use of the Boss vibrato pedal that he used on He's Back and I'm Blue and other things, and the Boss Dimension pedal. Just a lot of sounds that weren't being used in country music, where at times they sounded like, country music meets the Byrds, which makes sense, or country music meets the Pretenders, on certain, like Love Reunited, that has very much a vibe and almost sounds like it's influenced by the Pretenders. Also, you just had the fact that the Desert Rose Band, their music was very adult. I don't mean that any type of, lascivious, any type of, kind of crazy nature. I just mean that in the sense that it was not teeny bopper music. Like a lot of country music that was to come in the 90s was really more pointed toward young people. And, Chris Hillman covered topics like homelessness, the suicide of his father, all sorts of, the avarice that our country was going through. If you have to, another thing of, knowing the context, if you think about the 1980s, this was the era of the yuppie. This was the era of lifestyles of the rich and famous, where just avarice was on display, and it was being praised over and over again by the media, that being wealthy and by pushing other people down to get there was okay. And in fact, you should do it. And Chris Hillman was speaking out against that in his music, and talking about, and also even talking about the protest songs of the 1960s, and just a lot of really wonderful music. I'm gonna, pause right here and mention that Chris Hillman wrote a wonderful autobiography called Time Between, and I've have tons of music bios that I've read, and this is one of the best ones I've read out there. It's wonderful. He really is very honest, and so many people put a overly shiny sheen on their own story, and I particularly enjoyed hearing about his childhood and him being honest about things like his father, taking his own life, and because I think that so many of us are touched by suicide, and just being open about that, and kind of making it something that we can talk about, and not just bury it inside, or even racism. Chris Hillman's when he was a child, his home burned down, and Chris Hillman was his family was Jewish, and he was in Southern California, and this seems just impossible to me now, but in the 1950s, when his home burned down, his family was not allowed to stay at the local hotel, and they knew the owners, and in Southern California, because they were Jewish. And just the fact that he was able to tell these stories, and we're able to learn from these things and see what things were really like. And so this is a really great book, and was very helpful. And he's very honest about his story. As the band went on, the next album was called Running, and that, of course, has Hello Trouble on it with Herb Pedersen singing, and that's Brad Paisley's favorite tune, and the solo on that is something that he learned, and he would play over and over at times in sound check, and there would be times when of course I was Brad Paisley's guitar tech for a number of years, and if we were going to have a show where he wasn't able to sound check, then he would always just say, make it sound like Hello Trouble and we'll be fine. So yeah, so I'll just go ahead and mention that Brad Paisley was and is a huge fan of John Jorgensen, and a lot of his guitar sounds come from the Desert Rose Band and John Jorgensen, his work in there, and it was a huge influence on him. In fact, he spoke with the producers of the Desert Rose Band albums, trying to figure out how John got his guitar sounds on tape. So he would use the same microphones and the same type of mic pre's and other things early on, kind of really going after, especially on the first two albums. Those, Who Needs Pictures and Part 2 are very much him, chasing the John Jorgensen Desert Rose Band guitar sounds. And I think after that, he started kind of doing a little bit more of his own thing, but that was always a core. So yeah, so Running, of course, has the title track Running, which mentions, Hillman's father's suicide and such. But the band was really, plugging along, a lot of different sounds, a lot of different topics. Again, adult topics, not teeny bopper music. And then country music really started changing. And, there was this new movement that, we could mention a lot of names, but the main one is Garth Brooks. Garth Brooks came in with a level of showmanship, that really took a lot from 70s rock and roll, from Kiss and other things, and an amazing performer and songwriter, and great band and everything. But really took country music in a different direction. Also, you have the context of the time where you had pop and rock music was changing. It changed overnight. It went from there being hair bands and hard rock music and Bon Jovi, to all of a sudden all those bands went away, and there was grunge music and rap music, and there were a lot of people that felt alienated. Some loved, of course, grunge and rap, but others didn't. And so country music had this influx of youth and people that were kind of disenchanted with pop music, and all of these new groups and artists came into country music, and the Desert Rose Band kind of found themselves kind of being left behind. And so during this time, they made a greatest hits album, which included Chris Hillman's name at the top. It said Chris Hillman and the Desert Rose Band. And I was told that the reason they added Hillman's name was because he had just been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Byrds. And that album had a couple of tunes that were supposed to be on their fourth album. But, so that's another, if you're really only going to get one, Desert Rose Band album, it should be the greatest hits album called A Dozen Roses. And what ended up happening was they made an album with a different producer, with Tony Brown, and Dee Maness, the steel player, left, and they used Paul Franklin, and they kind of went in a different direction because they were really trying to chase the new sound and the new direction of country music. And you had the album True Love, which is not a bad album by any means, but it was not as enjoyable as the prior three albums, and of course the greatest hits album. So after that, for the tour, they brought in Tom Brumley to replace Dee Maness. And then after that, both John Jorgensen and drummer Steve Duncan left the band, which was a huge blow. And John and Steve both went on they left to join a television production called Hot Country Nights. And that was a Dick Clark production that was on television at the time. And so they were part of the house band. And so it was kind of sad to see them leave the Desert Rose Band, but then it was nice to be able to see them on TV every week. So you saw Jorgensen and Steve Duncan playing every week and backing up all sorts of different artists. The Desert Rose Band, kind of kept on for a little while and actually did one final album that was only released in Europe. It's called Life Goes On. I actually have a copy of the album on CD, and it's a departure. It has, you know, like Tony Rice and others as guests on a couple of tunes that are, of course, more acoustic and bluegrass oriented. And then there are two songs that Jorgenson came back to play on, which of course sound more like the classic Desert Rose Band. But the singles were not. I guess the first single was not received well, and so Curb decided not to release the album in the U.S. at all. So I got the album back in 1999 while I was living in France. I picked up Life Goes On. So, you know, of course, Jorgenson goes on to do the Helicasters and play with Elton John and do all, you know, and he's played with all sorts of different acts. And Chris Hillman kind of got together with Herb Pedersen, and they continued to perform as a duo. And so they would do festivals and, you know, club dates and all sorts of things. And they have always had a very special harmony sound together. The sound of Chris Hillman and Herb Pedersen, you know, singing together is wonderful. It's even on, there's a Lyle Lovett album that, you know, I think it's a One-Eyed Fiona that has, you know, Chris and Herb singing harmony vocals, and that, you know, won a Grammy. And it's, you know, it's the sound of their two voices together. It's just, it's magical. And John Jorgenson was such an important part of their harmony sound. It was really the three of their voices together that created their wonderful vocal blend. Yeah. Then, you know, after a number of years, they kind of started, you know, performing together. Not really, well, you know, somewhat, but more they started kind of, you know, recording together. And so Jorgenson and Herb Pedersen and others would kind of perform on Chris Hillman records and such. And then finally in 2010, they did a full-on reunion show, and they did it at the Belcourt Theater here in Nashville, and I was at it. And it was ridiculously great. It was all the original members, and Brad Paisley even got up and played a couple songs with the band, just to be an additional guitar part, where there were tunes like One Step Forward, where John was playing the electric 12-string and Brad was playing the 6-string bass, you know, so they could get the intro and all the different sounds. And then they did Hello Trouble with them playing guitar solos back to back. The first time it was Brad, and then the second time they played the guitar solo, but they did it in harmony, where John played a harmony part to the original, and it was just ridiculously great. That's one of those nights I'll always remember seeing the Desert Rose Band. And Emmylou Harris came out and they did The Price I Pay, which was a wonderful duet that they did that featured John doing the delay trick where he's doing the dotted eighth notes and even doing like some tapping, you know, kind of like Eddie Van Halen. But then the band, you know, played a handful of shows, you know, as part of that kind of reunion thing. And then Hillman and Jorgenson and Herb Pedersen played some shows just kind of as Desert Rose Band acoustic, you know, just not a ton of them. And then, you know, fast forward a number of years, and Tom Petty produced an album for Chris Hillman. In fact, it was right before Tom Petty passed away. He produced a Hillman record, and on it he featured, you know, Herb Pedersen and John, you know, all singing and playing together. And one of the really great things is they do the Everly Brothers tune "Walk Right Back," of course, written by Sonny Curtis, and it's beautiful singing and beautiful playing, and Jorgenson does a wonderful solo on that. So in 2017, Bill Bryson, the original bassist for the band, he passes away. And at that point, I didn't think we were ever going to see the Desert Rose Band do a show together. And also, most of the guys were in their late 70s, except for John. John's, you know, 66 now, and the rest of the guys were, you know, well, except for the Steve Duncan, the drummer, but they're all in the 77, 78 range. Well, and then just a couple months ago, it was announced that the Country Music Hall of Fame was doing an exhibit called Western Edge. It's the roots and reverberations of Los Angeles country rock. I'm going to give a brief aside here. This was given to me by my friend Doug Pedersen, who is he's battling brain cancer, and I had the extreme joy of being able to spend time with Doug and Stephanie, his wife, in here in Nashville, and they gave me this poster, and also he created this Ask Doug pick and gave it to me, and so I was very touched by that, and prayers, love, and all sorts of, and gratefulness for their friendship. So again, the Country Music Hall of Fame, announced that they were doing this focus, this exhibit on California country rock, and they announced that the finale for the opening was going to be the final show by the Desert Rose Band. And of course, I bought a ticket and went to it, and I was just blown away. It was so great to see that band one more time, and to see these guys that, except for John, they were in their, John and Steve, the rest of the guys were in their late 70s, and they sang and played their butts off. It was a fantastic show. They did all of their they did a lot of their material. They did, almost most of even the album cuts, and it was just a stellar show. It sounded great, and it was a wonderful moment. And again, if you want to know what guitars and equipment and everything that John Jorgenson used, you can go to the link in the description, and it'll take you to my website where I have the tunes, this kind of the set list written down. Also, there's some wonderful photos by Bob Seaman, who was kind enough to allow me to use some photos to put on my website, so you can see some shots of the show. It didn't look like there was anything recorded from the show, but I don't know that, but it'd be wonderful if something did. The other thing would be, I hope that at some point Chris Hillman allows the 2010 show at the Belcourt to be released. It sounded and looked wonderful, and I've even seen some video of it that was being that John was kind enough to show me, but again, Hillman has not been willing to release it officially. So, yeah, if you want to dig in more, of course, I highly recommend you listen to their greatest hits album. It's called A Dozen Roses, and of course, Chris Hillman's book, Time Between, is wonderful to learn, of course, about the Desert Rose Band, about his career as a songwriter and singer, and Manassas and all the other things that he's done. All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. If you've enjoyed it and you want to support the show, there is tip jar information and Patreon links and such below. And again, you can find out information. You can find merch and such at askzach.com. Today, because I'm celebrating the Desert Rose Band, I'm wearing my Desert Rose Band shirt that I bought, a while back. Yeah, they're huge influence on me, and I've, it's kind of just such an important band, and I highly recommend that you listen to them. I'll put a Spotify playlist in the description also if you need if you need that. So, all right, guys, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.